All right. So we wanted to talk about expectations that are placed on research team leaders in academia, and that they are essentially completely unrealistic. So specifically, I'm talking about the expectations for consistent and continuous output and productivity. It comes to mind because it's annual faculty evaluation time, because I guess the business year ends for universities. And so I don't know about you, Kendra. I suspect it's the same, but I have to have new grant funding on my CV. I have to have publications on my CV, and all the service and the other things.
Yeah, ditto to all of that. And, also outreach, broader impacts. For me, a lot of like teaching evaluations, student evaluations of what they think of us. It's all part of it.
Yeah. And so I've been thinking a lot about why is our job so stressful? And I think in part our job is so stressful because there are these demands on our productivity and output without the resources to support that. I mean, especially here in the US, our research teams are relatively small, right? My team currently is composed of 5 team members, 6, including myself, with some overlap, right? Some fluctuations, people coming, people leaving. Now, this people coming, people leaving is actually something that I think is different from other industries. We just can't really rely on a consistent and consistently productive professional workforce, because the nature of our job is to train scientists. And so I don't know, Kendra, do you have a staff scientist, somebody who provides like consistency across?
I do not. No. So my lab is more in the ecology, evolution, and behavior field. So in very traditional basic science. And so it's common for us to largely run our labs with graduate students and maybe 1 or 2 postdocs. Sometimes we'll have technicians, but in my case, I have not had a lot of success working with technicians in my lab. So yeah, small workforce. And also, when you're talking about graduate students, they're not trained and they're also not expecting to be employees. It is not anything like a typical employer-employee relationship. It's a mentoring relationship.
Right. And so in this context, it's just challenging because of this variability. So because we don't have a professional workforce with people who are with us over very long stretches of time. I mean, I don't know, we have like 4 or 5 years maybe, right, with our graduate students and postdocs. And so, I mean, my experience is they start like, I don't know, what do you call that, catching their stride or whatever, being consistent as graduate students. That can sometimes take 2-3 years. Postdocs hopefully are productive or, consistent in their output a little bit faster. And still, so last year I had this challenge, self-imposed challenge, that I moved institutions. And so I moved with 4 people to actually, like strategically, I had it mapped out. Like I wanted to have this consistency across. And we actually also worked really hard to make sure that we don't have dips in productivity. So we prepared samples, reagents, and so on, so that we could work even without compliance protocols in place on the other end. And yet, I mean, there's just unpredictable events that sometimes occur that throw a wrench into your strategy. For example, one of my postdocs landed a faculty position, which was like, yay, celebrations, right? It was awesome. But at the same time, I now lost one of the first members of my research program. So this kind of consistency got lost. We had to shuffle because he had to transition really quickly. And so, we didn't have a lot of time to transfer skills and so on. And it was during a time where we transitioned the lab anyways. So then another team member who had moved with us decided he wanted to do something else with his life and career. And so now we were down, right, from 4 to 2 people, plus myself. And I mean, like, our productivity did get a hit last year. I wrote review articles, kind of making up, but definitely our primary research lost momentum because of this double whammy of losing team members that I relied on and moving institutions and having to set things up from the get-go. And so this expectation that we produce publications, every year consistently, I think is a challenge. I think this is what causes a lot of stress and probably also lower quality science, to be honest.
And I think your experience, anyone who was in science through the period of the COVID-19 quarantine can relate to that feeling of completely losing momentum and this like inertia that you had to rebuild from. Anything from like getting reagents to restarting experiments, retraining people, getting people back into like a rhythm and a culture in your team, or getting yourself there, right? Like just getting my own energy back and getting re-inspired by the research. It happens anyway in science, but I think we can all like really, really relate to that struggle and the feeling that it's impossible. I mean, the advice of like, you just have to do it all, right? Like it's so strong in our culture that like, no, to be successful, you just have to figure out how to get it all done. And for most of us, that has meant, working nights and working weekends and giving up on sleep or any sort of like wellness and health. And I think that we're seeing that sort of epidemic of mental health in academics. That all resonates so much with me.
So how do we solve this? I just saw you deflate a little bit. You're like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the first thing is figuring out what you actually care about, right? So like, I used to hate writing grants because I was writing grants to check the box, and I was writing them because I was motivated by fear. I was terrified of not getting tenure. I was terrified of not being able to support the people in my lab. Like I have parents who work for me, so I'm like supporting entire families. It's stressful. Now, ironically, the thing that I least enjoyed, which was writing grants, I love the most because, some of that totally privileged position here, I have tenure at a large institution. I feel pretty secure. And I think some of that security is necessary to be able to be really invested in your creative, innovative thinking. But now writing a grant for me, as I think about it in a completely different way, which is that I'm getting to learn about something new and I'm getting to forge new collaborations and I'm delving into a new area of science that's adjacent to what I've been doing. So that's inspiring. And a lot of that came from reframing, doing what we do, tapping back into why I originally wanted to do this job. I originally wanted to be a scientist because it's a process of continual growth and learning. And I went through a period of time where I had cut myself off from that and I was focused just on the productivity. And I think our teams fall into that as well. So if you're working with a team of people and you're under that pressure and they're under that pressure, no one has remembered why they originally wanted to do this or found that inspiration or energy in their work. And that's really hard. But I also think that like we need a major culture change, which is to recognize that there are ebbs and flows to productivity and that it's not completely under our control. And that also comes from, this community of people who are open about their experiences and can share with each other sort of the reality of their unique struggle. You know, we're out here kind of like sharing our perspective, which is that of like a, you know, tenured white woman in America. But, you know, I think we need more of what you just said, just recognizing that the model of like just do it all is not sustainable.
Yes. And I really liked what you said about reconnecting with what you actually wanted. Actually, today on my list of things to do is re-recording module 1 of the Research Leadership Mastery course, which for some reason I skipped last year. Everything else got redone. But the kind of like starting point for the whole course is to reconnect people with what they originally wanted to do this job for, right? Like this career for. It's about rekindling that spark. And I think that's so important. This actually also really helped me. I mean, I still sometimes fall into this trap of like thinking about the checklist. I call it the checklist, you know, the things that we need for promotion and tenure, or to be told that we're good little kids and we've been doing a good job. Which I think we've all been really conditioned to care about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And like when I remember what is really important to me, what my values are and what I care about, that really helps me to reset, to feel grounded, to feel safe. Because it is important to me, you know, to have time to spend with my family. It is important to me to enjoy what I'm doing every day at work. You know, I don't like to wake up and like feel like, oh, I have to do this thing and that thing. And I'd rather just like go back to sleep, you know. So I think that is the key, you know. And I think in this whole attempt of academia, I mean, probably in fairness, certain metrics were introduced to make things more fair, more comparable. But are they more fair? You know, because as we talked in our last video, you know, there's this like one stereotype and prototype, or maybe we haven't yet. Maybe this was a personal conversation that we're getting measured against. But there are so many ways to contribute in academia, right? And so like having these metrics be so stiff is not helpful, and I think it makes people miserable.
I completely agree. I think that we all, you know, it's going to be some time before the entire system changes, but the first step is recognizing where you find, I know it's like a dangerous, overused word, but where you find joy in your work. Like where you, like what do you actually get inspired by and energized by? And, you know, why did you do this thing to begin with? And trying to figure out, you know, recognizing that there are certain bars we have to meet, but how can you reallocate your time and energy to focus on those things that matter the most to you while still getting above that bar? And, you know, in that way, we will generate more of those prototypes of success, you know, people who are contributing in different ways. And I do see that out there. Like, I don't think that there's only, you know, I think that there is a culture change already underfoot. I think that there are people who are doing amazing work for DEIJ. I think there are people who are investing more in teaching. And that used to be segregated to different types of institutions, but I'm seeing it more and more at our like large R1s. And that makes me really hopeful. But again, I think that the way it has to start is by doing that work yourself before you can have that impact on the broader culture.
Maybe in closing, you know, I think that's like part of what really inspires me to keep doing this business of helping people grow their, sometimes I call it self-leadership skills, you know, because it's a lot of that. I really like when we work with cohorts of people and there is this, like, there's always this point in time where people realize that this isn't about checking all the boxes, and this isn't just about getting satisfaction and fulfillment out of achievement, but that this is really about you doing what you care about and what you enjoy, right? Like this point where people step into this empowerment, taking back like agency in a sense for how they show up at work. I really love that. Maybe you can speak to that because you're now in charge of leading this program.
Yeah, I mean, in our last group, I was so glad to become sort of superfluous, right? Like I started out as a facilitator, and the group really started supporting and mentoring each other, and in like very big ways, in career changing ways. And I think, you know, as human beings, we all want to have connection, and we all want to feel that we're having a positive change, right? Like we want to help each other. I think that's just like being a primate. And I think if you are following, or if you felt very trapped by the existing culture of sort of typical achievement benchmarks, then you can get disconnected from that. And to realize that by changing the way that you think about things and supporting other people and becoming empowered through your team, through other community and contact with colleagues, to have that, to find that spark and that power over how they choose to spend their time and energy, that, you know, that is probably the most rewarding thing for all of us. And like on an even deeper philosophical note, our lives and our work are defined by our attention, right? Like where you put your attention, where you put your energy is your experience, and your experience is your life. So ultimately, this work that we're trying to do of simply redefining how we approach our work is, in fact, redefining the experience that you get to have of your life, which I know is like a little woo-woo, but I mean, that's why this is worth it, right? It's changing culture, it's supporting people, but it's also at the most basic level, determining the experience you get to have of your life and your career.
That's a great closing point here. And for those who are interested in this leadership training, link in the comments. You can check it out more and get in touch with us. Like, really don't feel shy about it. I usually hop with people, like on a call with people, and just have a conversation. And either it's a fit or it's not a fit, but I always learn something new about a colleague, and hopefully can also provide some helpful perspectives. All right, bye for today.